we're going to talk about being an anxious achiever. And we started with you having some pairs of jeans hanging behind you in the closet, not feeling super camera ready. And it's actually maybe some signs of recovery, of anxious achiever recovery, that you're willing to just hop on a podcast and not have everything be so perfect before you get started. But uh, tell us a little bit about you, who you are, what this whole concept of anxious achiever is.
Um, it's funny. I haven't done a podcast for my book in a while, and
Yeah.
so I'm a little bit out of practice. It's lovely to be here with you. And I started a podcast called The Anxious Achiever uh 5 years ago because I was just in the course of my life writing about what it was like to manage a pretty high intensity career with an anxiety disorder. And whenever I would talk about it, because I liked talking about it, didn't feel much shame around it or anything, people, their eyes would just light up and they would have lots of questions and they would want to engage. And I thought, we got to talk about this more. There are so many people at work who are managing mental illness and mental health challenges, and we never talk about it. And so that was really what I wanted to do. I wanted to create a forum for people in the business world. I launched the Anxious Achiever with Harvard Business Review. So it was very firmly, a career podcast with a really credible name to talk about our mental health and our work. And that's what I've been doing for the past 5 years. And before that, I had a podcast also called Hiding in the Bathroom, which was
Oh,
also
that's a
sort
good
of about
title.
emotions and work and how we all get through.
Yeah, I like that. Tell us a little bit about your story. You said that you struggled with anxiety, you've been open about it. How does your anxiety manifest at work?
Yeah, I mean, I've had anxiety since I was 19, clinically diagnosed anxiety since I was 19. So it's been a part of my work life,
Mhm.
as has depression. Um, and I think that anxiety has impacted my work in really practical ways and in many ways that have been both positive and negative, to be honest. And that's part of what I try to capture in the anxious achiever is that double-edged sword that a lot of us feel about our anxiety, where it's a traveling companion. It's something that we've maybe managed. We're sort of wired a little bit differently, or we have had childhood experiences that make us anxious, and we learn to depend on that anxiety. And often we get rewarded for that anxiety because it makes us work really hard and it makes us work to very high standards and it makes us push, right? And so the anxiety fuels our activity, it fuels our ambition, it fuels our career. At the same time, it takes a real toll on our mental health. And, I think what I've learned when I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people who might consider themselves anxious achievers is that there really is a double edged sword with their anxiety.
So how would we be able to know if we are an anxious achiever? What's sort of the checklist of things that would that category that you've defined, an anxious achiever category?
I mean, it's definitely a term of art, right? It's not a
Yeah.
diagnosis in any way, but the anxious achievers that I um, know and love and have interviewed are people who might have been called high strung when they were kids. They were seeking the gold stars. They were driven towards perhaps a lot of external markers of success. So honor roll or captain of the team, or I got the check plus on my paper. And a lot of them grew up in really insecure households where they felt that their performance or showing up in a certain way as a kid was expected, and they grew to rely on that and even have that as a habit. And so I think that a lot of us who are anxious achievers are playing out really old patterns, and we play them out at work, and for a while we get really rewarded for it, right? Because we're always on top of our team, and maybe we're micromanaging a little bit, and maybe we're the ones staying late and making sure that we push ourselves. um, and then unfortunately a lot of us hit a wall.
And then we have all these costs, whether it's burnout costs or physical health costs, but also I think it really, the cost comes into our relationships, our friendships, our mean, I would definitely define myself more as an anxious achiever in the past. Um, Maybe it shows up in certain domains now, but not as much. But certainly, I was the one that when in grad school, you could go to happy hour or you could stay and study and, stay in the lab until late. I would stay in the lab until late. Who needs happy hour? Why would you even waste your time at happy hour? And that leads to
Right.
not developing a
Right.
whole lot of friends or even having the stress relief. I mean, I kind of understand why it's called happy hour. It's like an hour to go relieve stress and be with people. Hi, I'm Dr. Dinah Hill. Thank you so much for joining me with Your Life in Process. And if you want more, if you're interested in applying these processes to your daily life, join me at my membership, More Life in Process. At More Life in Process, you will get meditations for you to practice at home. You'll get extra bits from the episode that maybe got recorded after the fact. You're going to get PDFs and handouts, things that you can use to apply your daily practice to your life. And I can't wait to see you there. $5 a month, $50 for the year. You can go to yourlifeinprocess.com to sign up. But the default to always be achieving, or the default that there's always more that you can do, and then the short-term praise that you're getting from that is certainly, it's like egosyntonic, it's reinforcing, it works for a while. It's like a lot of things like dieting or pushing yourself
Yep.
too much in an
It
exercise
works until it
program. Yeah,
doesn't.
it works short term, and then you wake up and feel a little bit like, oh, wait, was this worth it?
My goal is just for people to open up new possibilities and to look at new ways of being that allow them to integrate the parts they love about their anxious achiever self.
Mhm.
There's parts of my anxious achiever self that I absolutely love after years of therapy and, I vibrated at 12, which is who I am. I'm up early, I'm pushing, I am a worrier, but I'm also deeply caring and empathetic and very invested. So I think that, like anything in life, it's just worth looking at. It's a helpful lens to look at yourself with if you find yourself feeling burnt out, exhausted, wondering why you always get stuck in the same roles at work, right? Wondering why I'm always working harder than everybody else. Why am I taking on everything else for people? We get ourselves stuck in patterns at work because work rewards anxious achievement. There's always more email to answer. There's always more Slack to be receptive to. And so you can sort of get stuck in a little folie à deux at work with your anxious achievement. And I see a lot of people, especially now post pandemic, thinking, you know what, I don't want to be like this anymore.
And at the same time, I would think that anxious achievers also don't want to be told, slow down, just don't work so hard, don't care so much, don't be such a perfectionist. As you were saying, that you like this part of you, or you like parts of it. And so it's more of finding the dial where you're in charge of it, as opposed to the dial being in charge of you, in terms of when you are applying the anxious achiever self and then when you're dialing it back. And that requires some degree of wisdom. It requires some degree of inner awareness for yourself of what's working for you, what's not working for you, looking at consequences, looking at reward, like what are the true rewards that you're going after? Like what are your true intentions for the work that you're doing, as opposed to just the automaticity of being on the achievement treadmill, like set at level 10 all the time. I mean, I used to I don't run on treadmills anymore, but I used to run on treadmills, and it was always like, get on and just set it at the maximum level without ever any kind of check-in of how am I feeling right now, or even why
Exactly.
am I doing this? Like, what type of workout do I want to get? Um, and for what reason?
Exactly. Exactly. I can run at a 10. Do I choose today to run at a 10? Right. And I think that the dial is really excellent. I think that it's really about feeling you are mindfully in control more of how you respond to all the things that would make you anxious and make you act out your anxious achieverness, right? So I think that when you feel you have a choice to say, I'm going to use this anxiety. You know what? I've got a deadline. I'm stressed out about it. I really care about it. I'm super anxious. I may not sleep tonight, but that's okay because this is my choice and I do care about this. It's going to be over in a week. That's very different than always waking up at 3 in the morning worrying about, did I perform well enough? Am I going to make this deadline? Am I going to keep my job? Is my boss going to like me?
So, how does your anxious achiever show up in your life now? You said today was the first day of school. So, your parent. When does it show up in ways that you find are helpful? And then when does it show up in less helpful ways? And what do you do about it when it does?
I find being a parent really a real trigger for it, to be honest.
Mhm.
It's really tough. I am a parent in a very competitive environment. And I joke that my town is literally full of anxious
You're in
achievers. People
Boston.
move here for
Yeah.
that reason. And so
The home of Harvard.
I'm outside of
Yeah.
Boston. Yes. And exactly. Everybody in my town has is at Harvard. And so I actually have to really, it's funny, I'm doing a talk at our community education center in a couple of weeks, and I'm like thinking about how am I going to talk to all of us who live in this environment where we parent and we mean to parent mindfully and we mean to parent in ways that support our kids, but our own drive has gotten us to choose this town. And we're working on that ourselves. So it's something I think a lot about, especially as my kids get older and the temptation to put them in ever more activities and competitive sports and all the things, a life of privilege in the US these days. It's really a dance, and it's something I feel a lot in the beginning of the year. Like, what's my own relationship with my anxiety about my kids right now?
And then how that gets transmitted to our kids and what do we want them to have in terms of their
Yep.
relationship with anxious achievement, right? I get super triggered by talking to other moms about activities their kids are engaged in because we've taken
Oh my
we've taken the less is more approach, like really less is more approach. Inside I feel okay about that until I start hearing the incredibly creative things that other kids are doing. It used to be just you have to be really good at soccer. But now it's like, no, my child is taking some kind of like obscure sport that no one else knows about, that's really going to be the secret. And they're really getting very strong at it while they're also doing their Japanese lessons and things like that. And so it's sort of they have interesting children with interesting lives. And at the same time, it becomes this competition for, I don't know what, to get to achievement, to get somewhere. We do it as adults and then we project it onto our kids. And then our kids actually have, just like we do as adults, true interests and things they want to achieve at and do better at. And so it's this always this fine line of how we encourage that without it turning into this dark side of the double-edged sword. It's hard.
It's fighting for airtime in the excellence airspace. Like, I'm just like, I think of it like air traffic control, and all the excellent people are just like trying to get on the flight path. And
Yeah.
it's funny. I said to my son who's entering high school, because he was complaining about homework, which is notorious. And I said, look, you can choose what kind of kid you want to be. I was that kid. I studied hours a night because I wanted to go to an Ivy League school. I was that kid, and I can't pretend to you as your mom that I wasn't. And that was the right choice for me. But you don't have to be that kid. You can choose to be. And if you choose to be that kid, you are going to do 3 hours of homework a night, and you need to make that your choice. When our kids want to pursue excellence and the anxiety that comes along with that, we also owe them sort of as much clear-eyed knowledge as they can have about it, I think.
I've been doing kind of a deep dive into the concept of wisdom recently because I'm working on a project about wise
Mm,
effort. And I was like, I better figure out what psychology has written about wisdom, like what's the research on wisdom. And there's all these
mm,
different angles on wisdom. There's been a number of different papers written on wisdom and different conceptualization. There's a Berlin wisdom paradigm. And they say things like having rich factual knowledge, so knowing a lot about things, and rich procedural knowledge, knowing how to do things. But one of the most recent papers that I read that I really liked broke it down into wit and virtue. And I think we're focused a lot on wit. So wit is about being able to solve problems and this kind of like excellence, being able to do a lot of things well. Wit also has the ability to integrate knowledge, apply it. But the second part that I think is missing from, or maybe is less of a focus, is the part about virtue, which is it in the service of something to benefit, something that's a benefit, like to benefit you, to benefit others? Does it feel good to you, benefit your life? When you check in with yourself and you do this thing, this extracurricular activity, do you feel it's beneficial to you? Not even about like excellence. Like, is it
mhm,
beneficial for you to
mhm.
continue playing at this competitive level of baseball? And that's
Right.
where I want to
Right.
work on with, and maybe I've over indexed on benefit with my kid and not done as much wit building, but this balance of how do we, I actually really just want wise kids. I want kids that can have the wisdom to make choices around what's, like you're saying, like what kind of kids you want to be, what kind of education do you want, and to be able to check in with themselves around that, but also lean on others' wisdom and have lots of life experience to develop that wisdom through this idea of wit and virtues. It's tricky because when you're living more from virtues, you may choose to do some things that look different, or maybe they're not as accomplished in some ways, but they feel better in other ways.
It's challenging. And, I think difference makes people uncomfortable. Choosing different paths makes people uncomfortable around you. And one of the things that I think a lot about right now, as I think about, and I'm sure you have lots of thoughts, I'm writing an article about generational differences and how we think about and talk about mental health at work. Ideally, I want people who manage strong feelings to have great knowledge of themselves and what makes themselves tick and how to create wisdom for themselves, but to also have a bigger sense of life outside the self. And I think that that's one of the things that this kind of obsessive parenting doesn't do. It doesn't help our kids create a life outside of the self
Mm-hmm.
because it's all about the self and where the self is going to go and what the self is going to accomplish. And right now, we really need to think about other people and be in community with other people. And that's really hard.
I interviewed Jordan Feingold. She wrote a book with Scott Barry Kaufman. And one of the research articles that Scott wrote that she referenced was this research article on the difference between grandiose narcissism and fragile narcissism. And fragile narcissism, this concept of self. So grandiose narcissism, we know the people that are really into themselves. They just want to go to Harvard so they can say that they went to Harvard at a dinner party. That's grandiose narcissism, right? But there's another type of narcissism that very much has to do with this concept of self, of fragile narcissism, where your self-worth is so fragile that you're constantly seeking out praise and reassurance that you're okay. This is very much anxiety driven. And you're constantly like it almost creates
Totally.
more selfing as opposed to being able to look at, okay, there's more than just me in this moment. And how can I turn my eyes out to what else is going on? Where can I be helpful, basically?
When it comes to all this stuff, I really just want everybody, and this includes men especially, to understand that we're all a little bit of a fragile narcissist, and that's okay. As long as we know that one of the best ways to get out of feeling imposter syndrome is to turn to other people and
Mm-hmm.
talk to them and engage with them, right? Is to get out of the self. And that's a skill that we learn.
Yeah. Or to see that the self is not so separate. It's getting out of the self, but expanding the self to include all the other fragile narcissists that are out there that are quite similar. Narcissism has a negative connotation to it because we think of like diagnostic narcissism, but it's much more of a spectrum. First, there's healthy
Hmm.
narcissism, right? There's a healthy amount of taking care of yourself and getting your needs met and things like that. And then there's the narcissism of that's really painful of I'm just so stuck in my own self and trying to make myself good enough that it's a really unhappy, can be a very painful place to reside that we need some help with, all of us. It's on the rise for all of us as we're in positions where the self is being much much more fertilized just by the context that we live in
Hmm.
terms of social media and attention to self branding, all that kind of stuff. How to get out of ourselves, but also how to take care of ourselves. So you mentioned getting connected, and I'm curious how that has played out for you in terms of your career and your life and even your parenting, how that looks for you.
For me, getting connected is a really digital thing, to be honest. And I've written a ton about this. I am introverted and I have worked at home by myself during the day, physically by myself. I'm not by myself in my work, but I'm in proximity with myself mostly since 2006. And that really suits my personality. But I have rich networks that are maintained digitally. And then, we see each other around the country at conferences. And I really, truly, the key tenet of my life is in social networks with people and doing well by them, right? Having that generalized reciprocity in a network of people that you care about. And sometimes it's a network of people that you don't know that well, but you have a professional affinity with or some sort of affinity with, right? Could be like the PTO, or it could be your kid's soccer team, or it could just be a group of entrepreneurs that you're in a group with. And sometimes it's people that you know really well. And so I feel good when I feel like I'm part of networks, and that I'm being called on to help. And I think as I get older, that's something I really want to invest more in. I had my 25th college reunion this spring, and getting together with members of my volleyball team from college, it just felt like that instant sisterhood. It was amazing. And I realized how much I missed that in my working mom, working life. And so I'm thinking about like, how can I create more intentional groups of women in my life?
I like that you mentioned that it's digital for you and just opening the door to how it can look really different for different people based on their context, their personality, their preferences, their introversion, extroversion, where they lie in there. And there is an expectation that at least I see a lot of my clients get into where they have a vision of what it means to be part of a group. And that vision is I'm going to the events at 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, and I'm part of the group of people that's either drinking or out or getting photographed in some way that I'm creating this vision from seeing it on social media.
Yep.
And I don't feel like that fits for me. So therefore I'm not part of a group. When actually, if you kind of zoom out, you're like, well, wait a minute, you're actually part of lots of groups, but maybe you're not giving yourself credit for the fact that you're part of these groups. And maybe you're not investing in these groups or really taking in the benefits of them because you don't see them as a group. Whether that's just you're a part of a group of your neighborhood, your neighbors, that's a group, that's a community. And how do we feel into what feels right for us around those communities and groups and feed them, nourish them, grow them? And it doesn't have to look like you're part of the, whatever that 5 o'clock, I guess it's the happy hour that I didn't go to in grad school.
This is very much what my first book was about. My first podcast, there's such an emphasis in our culture on extroversion and being out there. And this is all pre-pandemic. It was even more so. And being that person who's always photographed at the dinner party. You don't have to be that. And you can still be a really wonderful friend and a trusted confidant and a great resource and a great networker. I love what you said about, you can choose the kind of interface that's right for you. And I really believe that. For me, writing online, publishing online, doing my podcasts, just building communities of practice online has been the greatest gift to me personally and professionally. And I've done most of it from my basement.
Yeah. And I'm the opposite. I find for me, when I'm doing stuff online, I feel more disconnected, even if there's a large online audience. Like if I do a workshop where a lot of people attend online, I will continue to do them because it's a way to reach a lot of people. But I feel a little bit more empty than I do. I run this meditation class on Friday mornings, and some mornings it's like 5 people there. And one of them is my mom. And it's at this little sweet yoga studio. And I go in and I feel at the end of that so full because I was just, in this
Yeah.
space with these people. I got to see their faces. I got to just sort of check in physically with them, give them a little hello. And it's such a big difference. And it is tuning into what works for you and not judging. Because when I was I was thinking, where can I subtract stuff from my to-dos to try and simplify? Because I was adding another project on. And I was like, oh, I could just get rid of that meditation class. No one really comes to it. But and keep on doing these other workshops. And when I actually looked at it, it was like, well, wait a minute. There's a part of me that really looks forward to those Friday mornings. And there's a part of me that after I do that, it carries with me through the rest of my day. So even if it's only 5 people, it's important. It has virtue to it. That is so unique to everybody. You have to step back from the expectations of what you've been told is successful to tune into what feels successful. And for you, it's doing online writing. And for me, it's not. And that's okay. And we both feel fulfilled and we're both contributing and sharing ideas. And like you said, accomplishing something. There is an accomplishment and achievement orientation to both of those. What else do you do in terms of helping your anxious achiever out to navigate the world effectively with anxiety?
Yeah, I mean, the single best piece of advice, and this will be news to nobody listening. I always take a beat. When you're anxious, you want to solve things quickly. You want to jump in. You want to know the outcome, right? You want to be right in there. And for me, that had a lot of really negative effects for years. I spent money stupidly. I made decisions impulsively. I would stick my foot in things. I really didn't understand how to not act out my anxiety with immediate motion and action. And that really, it hurt my marriage because I'd be anxious and I'd text my husband something in the middle of his workday that would just like totally throw him off. And honestly, it was simply learning. You know this in mindfulness, you know this in cognitive behavioral therapy. Every modality is like, learn to take a beat before you
Mm-hmm.
act. That's the single most powerful thing that I do.
Yes. For me, when I feel anxious or overwhelmed, I say yes to more things, which is an interesting phenomena because it makes you more
Yep.
anxious and overwhelmed because you're not sorting out, do I really want to do this? Or, or I'm anxious, I don't want to disappoint this person. So I just say yes. And then 3 weeks later, you're sitting in all your yeses and with a whole lot of anxiety. And I love the take the beat. And it's both, right? It's for some of the folks that I work with that have anxiety, it's take a beat, and for some folks that have anxiety, it's dive in without thinking about it so much. You've taken too many beats
Mm-hmm. Well,
because
that's
you're avoiding
yes.
everything by
Right.
putting it
If
off.
you're a
Yeah.
procrastinator, exactly. I'm
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
avoidant.
Yeah.
I'm the opposite. So I think that's a really good point because people are like, well, wait a minute. I want everything to be perfect and I have really high standards, but I never get
Yeah.
anything done. I'm the other kind of anxious, which is I'm just like, I'm all in there right now. But I think really it's understanding how anxiety shows up for you and what are the simple things you can learn to
hmm
mediate it.
Judd Brewer has been a frequent contributor on the show, and I love his really
Oh,
simple
yeah.
model because it's helpful just to map it out to figure out when anxiety shows up. What's the cue? Behavior. What do you do? And are you like Morra? Do you
Mm-hmm.
sit there and like go in and do all this stuff without pausing? Or are you frozen? And these are also the basics of threat, right? Or are you frozen and you don't do anything to the point where you just get so overwhelmed with anxiety? Now you're even more frozen and your life is, going on
Yep.
without you. And then what is the short-term consequence of that? And what is the long-term consequence? And mapping that out to then be able to intervene at the behavior level, not at the cue level. Because things, at least for my experience with anxiety, is that I'm always going to get cued for the rest of my life. Things are going to cue me. I'm going to be having a conversation
Always.
with another mom about all their child's accomplishments, and I'm going to be cued to feel anxious. And and then what do I do?
They're
Anxiety.
fencing scholarship to
Yeah.
Harvard. Yes.
Because am I not taking a beat and then trying to sign up my kid to a million things? Or am I frozen, not signing him up for anything? Or am I, somewhere in the middle of acting from a place of that like wit and virtue, that wisdom place that we all can get into when we take a beat, but also have a little bit of courage. And then what are the consequences for us in that
Well,
habit loop, which is kind of liberating because it is, yeah, anxiety. I wish there are pills that you can help with anxiety, but there, it is still something that's never going to go away, nor would you want it to some degree. It's helpful, as you mentioned at the beginning.
it's telling us something. We don't always have to listen to it, but it's telling us something. I also love Judd Brewer's work, and the piece that I love about the habit loop is replacement behavior. And so I just replace with breath. If I get that piece of information, this happened to me. I was double booked for a conference and I was so flooded with anxiety. I had the cold sweats and I couldn't breathe. I was just completely flooded. And I immediately then got on the phone to call my client. And my husband said, nope, 10 minutes isn't going to make a difference. And I put in breath. I just replaced that like harried phone call, which would have made things way worse. You're just going to breathe for a few minutes, or you could just run, or, just replacing it with some kind of behavior. That to me has been one of the most helpful things too.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to, unless you're on the scene of an accident, you always have 10 minutes to make a decision.
Mm-hmm. So sometimes that behavior is a behavior that tends to your nervous system, like the breath. And for some people with anxiety, the breath isn't the best place for them to go because it makes them more anxious when they're focusing on their breath.
Yep.
And figuring out what
Yes. I should say that it
yeah, for
works for
you,
me,
yeah,
but yes.
figuring out what sort of nervous system move you can do, because sometimes the take a beat is I actually literally need to take a beat to tend to my nervous system to be able to act more wisely. The simple stuff, taking a walk, doing some sun
Yep.
salutations. There's something about changing the pressure of your body, of moving up and down, like your head going down and going back up. And that sort of repetitive motion that's really, I find, is really helpful for anxiety. And there's some, polyvagal reason why I don't fully understand it, but doing things that are physical.
I lie on my foam roller
Yeah.
like a cactus.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's nice too. Something that's very opening, something that's physical, something that attends to your physiology. So then you can come back to it from a little bit more of a place of wisdom than just the reactive impulsivity of get rid of this bad feeling fast, which is usually what we want to do when we're anxious.
We don't want to feel anxious, and our brain knows that, right? I think that our whole culture needs to learn to take a beat. Social media needs to learn how to take a beat. And I think it would benefit a lot of people.
One more. Give us one more. We've talked about finding community and making that, unique to you, how you define community, what works for you in terms of your unique self. And then we've talked about taking a beat and maybe doing something physiologically to shift our anxiety, but just at least pausing and not responding impulsively or staying in the frozen mode too long. If there was one more go-to that you work with achievers on, a skill that you would love for them to use, what would it be?
Well, okay, so achiever FOMO flip. And this is in the brain, this is in the cognitive change, right? So we talked about calming your body, but one of the things that happens to all of us now is that we're going to be on LinkedIn, right? We'll be on social media, we'll just whatever, something comes across our feed, and it makes us feel bad about ourselves. It makes us feel anxious. It makes us feel like, well, Diana has all these followers and she's speaking at this conference and I'm not, right? It just triggers that anxiety that we're not performing well, that we're not doing well. Again, our digital day makes us really susceptible to this, right? And so one of the things that is really helpful, especially if like me, you tend to get stuck in a thought trap, right? I get stuck in comparison mode. Ugh, I'm such a failure. I'm never going to do this, right? And just like the negative self-talk just hits, is to get out of yourself and write a nice comment on LinkedIn, send an endorsement. Really, there's a quick digital action that can reframe the anxious fear of missing out, comparisons, that you get stuck in, into supporting a colleague. And that feels really good and it can break the anxiety.
And build that network that you're craving too. Yeah.
And build that network. Yes.
And most likely if they're on there, they're feeling what you're feeling. Back to this whole idea of the fragile narcissism, that we all experience it. And it's not bad. It's just we're all in it. And how do we help ourselves get out of it, or shift that perspective? I love that. Express some kind of appreciation, outward appreciation for something that you see. And it also shifts your attention from comparison to appreciation, which is a much more social engagement type system. So when we're in comparison, we're in threat and we're often in drive. And those two systems are overstimulated in these worlds. And when we're in giving, the sharing, caring, tending, befriending kind of mode, it's our social engagement system, which feels good. And it's the system that we all need to be working on building more of, because that's the system that's probably going to solve a lot of our problems, in addition to threat and drive. It's just we need that system to be stronger to help us with our threat and drive systems, to be able to utilize our threat and drive systems more effectively. So I love that. And appreciation for you, Morra.
Yeah.
This has been fantastic. You have so much wisdom to share, so many tips that are actually real life and grounded. I talk to a lot of like spiritual teachers and Buddhists and folks like that on the show, and sometimes it's so esoteric out there. You're like, what does this actually look like when I'm on LinkedIn? What do I actually do in there?
Just like her on LinkedIn. That's all you have to do.
Like some people, and that'll solve all your problems. Yeah, but it is tangible. It's a tangible thing. Take a beat, like some people, build your community, whatever that looks like, and check out The Anxious Achiever. You have a podcast and you have a great book that I really liked. That your book is how you present today. It's personal story as well as practical tips and super applied. So if you relate to being an anxious achiever, check that out and check out more of Morra's work.
Thanks so much, Diana. Thank you.